The grocery store line stretched like a slow-moving snake, coiling through the narrow aisles. People grumbled under their breath, annoyed by the long wait. It was just another Tuesday morning, cloudy and cold. Inside the store, the heating barely worked. A woman with a messy bun sneezed. A man in a business suit checked his watch again and again, tapping his foot impatiently. Behind them all, standing at the very end of the line, was an old woman. She wore a faded green military coat, the fabric frayed at the sleeves. Her boots were scuffed. Her white-gray hair was pulled neatly back in a bun. On her shoulder was a patch almost invisible with age. No one looked at it. No one cared to. Her posture was straight, arms at her side, eyes still. She carried a small basket with just a few things: bread, soup cans, and one small pack of tea. People kept glancing at her, but not with kindness. One teenager near the front laughed and whispered something to his friend, pointing back at her coat. "Looks like she walked out of a museum," he said. Someone behind her muttered, "Why does she have to wear that?" Trying to get attention, she heard them all, but she didn't say a word. She was used to being invisible. Her name was Lila. She was 79 years old. For years she had been coming to this same store, this same line, and faced the same cold looks. No one knew her story. No one had ever asked. She never offered. The cashier today was young, maybe 20. His name tag said Tyler. He chewed gum, tapped the keys on the register carelessly, and greeted people with forced politeness. His shift had just started, but he already looked tired. When Lila's turn finally came, the line had grown even longer. Tyler didn't even look up when she stepped forward. "Is that all?" he asked. Lila nodded. "Yes, just these." Tyler scanned the bread, then the soup. Then he paused. At the tea, he looked up for the first time and stared at her coat. He frowned. "You know, ma'am," he said loud enough for others to hear, "Halloween was last month." A few people chuckled. Lila blinked slowly but said nothing. Tyler smirked. "I mean, come on, military. You seriously wore that out here? You one of those people who watch old war movies and pretend they were part of it?" A woman behind her whispered, "Oh, give her a break." But Tyler was enjoying the attention now. "What unit was that, anyway? Is that even real?" Lila looked at him, her voice soft but firm. "It was real." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "Unhung? Sure. Bet you fought dragons too." That's when it happened. Just as Lila opened her wallet, a gust of wind came through the entrance doors. Someone stepped inside. A tall man, in full military dress uniform, his metal shining even under the store's dull lights. His posture was sharp. His boots clicked on the tile. He wasn't young, maybe in his late 50s, but his presence demanded silence. Everyone in the store turned. Even Tyler paused. The man stood still for a moment, scanning the room. Then his eyes landed on Lila. His entire face changed. He stared at the old, faded patch on her shoulder. His mouth dropped open slightly. Lila noticed their eyes met. Something passed between them, silent recognition. She gave the smallest nod. Tyler frowned. "Can I help you, sir?" But the man didn't answer. Instead, he walked forward slowly, as if approaching a legend. Lila gathered her groceries. "Don't mind me," she said. "I'm done here." She turned to leave. The officer stepped aside respectfully, eyes still locked on her uniform. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low and steady. "Ma, single quotes, am, ... Where did you serve?" Lila paused. "Long ago." The officer took one more look at her patch, then whispered, "That's impossible. That unit was ... disbanded. It was classified. That mark ... I've only seen it once in my father's photo." Lila smiled sadly. "Your father? He wouldn't be General Marcus Rowan, would he?" The officer's face went pale. "He was. He passed away 10 years ago." Lila nodded. "He was a brave man. I owed him my life." Tyler, now confused, said, "Wait, you know this guy's dad?" The officer turned to him. "She didn't just know him, she saved him." A hush fell over the front of the store. Customers leaned in, listening. Lila adjusted her basket. "I really must be going," she said. The officer stepped forward. "Please, what's your name?" But she didn't answer. She walked slowly toward the exit, her boots soft against the floor, her head high. The customers moved out of her way now. No one chuckled. No one whispered. They watched her with quiet curiosity, even awe. Tyler scratched his head. What just happened? The officer looked down at the counter. Then he picked up the small box of tea Lila had left behind and whispered, "History just walked past you, son." Outside, Lila stepped into the cold. She clutched her coat tight, not from the wind but from the memories flooding back. Years ago, she had stood in a line like that, not in a store but at a military checkpoint. She was barely 20. She had signed up in secret, lied about her age, begged to be included. At first, they laughed. Then they trained her. And when the time came, they sent her to a place where no one expected a woman to survive. She had survived, but survival had its cost. Silence, disappearance, years of pretending she was never there. Her stomach growled. She'd forgotten the tea. She turned the corner, headed toward home, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Ma'am, wait." It was the officer again. He was out of breath. In his hands, her groceries. "I paid for them," he said quickly. Please, let me carry them. Leela looked at him, her expression unreadable. You shouldn't have done that. He shook his head. I had to. I owe you more than you know. You saved my father. She looked into his eyes. And what do you plan to do with that knowledge? He paused. I'm not sure, but I want to know your story. Leela took the groceries gently. You're not ready? I need to be maybe. One day, she turned again to leave. He called out, what was your unit called? She stopped. Shadow Unit 17. His eyes widened. But, that unit never existed. It's not in any records. She looked over her shoulder. Exactly. And then she walked away. Back in the store, Tyler stood behind the register, suddenly very small. A woman in line whispered, I think. She was a real war hero. Tyler didn't answer. He looked down at the scanner, blinking. For the first time that day, he was speechless. Outside, the wind howled again. Lila walked into it like an old soldier returning from a battle only she remembered. Somewhere deep in her pocket, she carried an old photo faded, folded 100 times, a younger her, a younger world. But she never showed it to anyone. Not yet, because some stories wait for the right moment to be told, and her moment was coming. Years before the grocery store incident, the world was different, noisy, divided. Lila was 20 years old. She wasn't tall, but she stood straight like someone carrying an invisible weight. Her brown hair was tucked under her helmet, her eyes sharp. Most people didn't even notice her when she walked past, just like now, but back then, it was for another reason. No one believed she belonged in uniform. She didn't wear it proudly yet. At that time, she was just one of the volunteers, cleaning mess halls, sharpening knives, and taking orders from people who barely looked her way. She didn't complain. She was in. That was enough for a while. One evening, while peeling potatoes in the back of the base kitchen, she heard loud laughter from the hallway. A group of men passed by in black gear stealth uniforms. Their jackets bore no unit name. Their eyes didn't rest on anyone too long. They walked with purpose, like they knew something no one else did. One of them, a woman with a scar down her left cheek, stopped and looked at Leela. You want to do more than just peel potatoes? The woman asked. Leela looked up, wiping her hands on her apron. Yes. The woman tossed her an apple. Then prove it. Training field. Midnight. Lila's heart pounded that night. After everyone was asleep, she sneaked out. At the training field, 5 people stood in the shadows. All wore the same black uniform. The woman from earlier nodded at her but didn't smile. Run, she said. Leela ran. Then she climbed out. Then she crawled through mud, solved puzzles in the dark, disassembled and rebuilt a weapon in less than a minute. By dawn, her arms were shaking. Her legs wouldn't stop trembling. The woman handed her a towel. You're not fast, but you're focused. Lila didn't know what that meant yet. Weeks passed. Then one morning, she was summoned to a hidden part of the base. There, behind a locked metal door, was a room she had never seen. Maps covered the walls, radios buzzed softly, and a tall man with silver hair studied her. You're the one who kept showing up for training without being invited, he asked. Yes, sir. You know the kind of missions we do. No, sir. Good, you'll learn. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were names, photos, and places she couldn't pronounce. This is Shadow Unit 17, he said. We don't exist. If you fail, you disappear. If you succeed, you vanish. Still interested? Lila hesitated for a second, then she nodded. He handed her a new uniform, dark green. It looked plain. No name, no medals. Just one strange patch stitched above the left shoulder. A wolf said, down. What does the patch mean? She asked. It means you don't speak, he said. That was the beginning. She trained harder than she thought humanly possible. Her body ached every night. Her hands were always bruised. She learned how to speak 3 languages in secret. She learned how to read maps without light, how to blend in with crowds, how to take apart a device and rewire it with her eyes closed. They gave her a partner, Callan. He was quick, sarcastic, and didn't trust anyone. You'll get us both killed, he told her on day 1. On day 30, he handed her a knife and said, You're better than most of the men I've worked with. Their first mission came in winter. Behind enemy lines. Their goal, extract a captured scientist who knew something dangerous. They weren't told what. Snow fell heavy that night. Leela and Callan moved through the woods. Silent shadows. They reached the camp just before sunrise. While Callan disabled the security lines, Leela found the building and broke in through a vent. Inside, she found the scientist, an old man shivering in a cell. His arm had been broken. His voice barely worked. Please, he whispered. They'll come back soon. She broke the lock and carried him on her back. He weighed less than her pack. Outside, Callan was waiting, but they weren't alone anymore. 3 guards spotted them and opened fire. Leela dropped to the ground, shielding the man with her body. Callan returned fire and shouted, Move. They ran. Bullets chased them through the trees. The scientists kept mumbling names, strange names, code, maybe. Lila recorded it all in her head. By the time they reached the safe zone, Callan was bleeding from his arm. Lila had dirt in her eyes, snow in her boots, and the scientist was unconscious. When the chopper arrived, they didn't speak a word. Later, that week, she stood before the same silver-haired man in the base. You did well. he said. That man, he had the codes to a missile program. You stopped a war. Leela stared at her hands. No one will know, will they? He shook his head. They're not supposed to. She nodded. Then she asked, what happens to him now? He disappears. Just like you. After that mission, Leela stopped dreaming. She stopped writing letters. Her past blurred. The only constant was the cold metal of her badge, the patch on her arm, and the silence. She and Callan went on more missions, none of them mentioned in news reports. They rescued, retrieved, protected, and sometimes destroyed things they couldn't talk about. Once, she had to burn a document that could have changed the entire world if leaked. Another time, she pulled a general out of a sinking building seconds before it collapsed. That general, his name was Marcus Rowan, the same name the officer in the grocery store mentioned years later. That mission was different. It wasn't supposed to be her assignment, but another soldier had fallen sick. Leela stepped in at the last moment. She and Callan entered a war zone to retrieve General Rohan, who had been trapped during a bombing. They found him bleeding under rubble, barely conscious. Callan lifted him. Leela covered them both, returning fire with a rifle she barely knew how to use. She took a bullet to the leg, but kept going. They saved him, got him out. But Lila never told anyone. That was the last time she saw General Rowan. The day after that mission, Callan disappeared. She never knew if he was killed or sent on another mission. The silver-haired commander told her, sometimes, the ones we care about vanish first. That's the rule. Then he handed her a folded paper. You're being retired. Leela stared at him. Why? You've done enough. But I'm still useful. He shook his head. You've given enough of your life. Go live another one. They didn't let her keep any records, no medals, no pictures, just the uniform, just the patch. She walked away with a limp and 100 memories she couldn't share. Years passed. She worked at post offices, as a bus stop manager, a night shift nurse. No one asked about her past. She never offered. She spent her nights sipping tea, listening to the ticking clock. Sometimes she'd stare at the patch on her coat and whisper names into the darkness. Callan, Marcus, the scar-faced woman, even the silver-haired commander, all gone, maybe, or living like here in silence. That coat, she wore it whenever she went shopping, not for attention, but because it was warm, reliable, familiar, like an old friend, who never asked too many questions. She never expected the world to remember. But then, one ordinary morning in one small grocery store, someone did. Someone saw the patch. Someone knew. She couldn't stop thinking about it. For the first time in years, she felt her story wasn't dead. It was just waiting. That night, she took out a small metal box hidden under her bed. Inside were a few things she wasn't supposed to keep. A photo of her unit faces scratched out for safety. A piece of an old map, a silver pin, and a letter. The letter was from Callan. She had only read it once. It said, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. Or I did, and I'm somewhere far away. Either way, don't let them bury us in silence. One day, someone will ask you. Tell them what we were, what we gave, and why it mattered. Leela folded the letter. She looked at the mirror and saw not an old woman, but a soldier. That night, she didn't cry. She smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, the silence was about to break. 3 days passed since the grocery store incident. Lila didn't return there. She stayed home mostly, boiling tea leaves the old-fashioned way, and keeping the news on mute. The world outside kept moving fast, but her world was still quiet. She had lived that way for decades until that man in uniform had recognized her. The officer's face was still clear in her mind. His eyes, how they widened the moment he saw her patch. The way he spoke with respect, almost like he was speaking to a piece of history. She hadn't been looked at like that in years, not even by her own family. Lila had no children, no siblings. Her parents had passed away before they ever knew what she truly did. Her neighbors just knew her as that quiet lady in the green coat. No one ever came to visit, and she didn't expect them to. After a lifetime of secrets, loneliness had become her safest companion. But now, something had changed. There was a knock at the door. She opened it slowly. It was the officer. He wasn't in uniform this time, just a gray sweater, neat trousers, and a respectful smile. He held a box of pastries. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, he said. I didn't know where else to go. Lila raised an eyebrow. How did you find me? I asked around. There aren't many people wearing that patch anymore. Or ever. She let him in. He sat at the small wooden table while she boiled water. For tea. I never got your name, he said softly. She replied, Lila Jennings. He extended his hand. Daniel Rowan, Colonel. She didn't shake it. Colonel? She repeated. That's your father's rank. When I met him. Daniel nodded. He told me stories before he died. Not many, just one, really. About a woman who carried him through a blizzard after a bombing. Leela didn't answer. He said she had the eyes of someone who'd seen too much, and that he owed her everything. He said if I ever found her, I should listen. She placed the teacup in front of him. And are you here to listen? Colonel. Daniel looked embarrassed. I'm not here in uniform, just, as a son. Leela finally sat across from him. He opened a leather notebook and pulled out a photo. It was a black and white shot. Grainy, a man with a young face, clearly wounded. being helped through snow by someone whose face was hidden by a scarf. Only one thing was visible, the patch on the helper's shoulder. You, Daniel said, pointing to the image. This was you, wasn't it? Lila nodded slowly. That photo, she said, wasn't supposed to exist. My father kept it hidden, said the world wasn't ready for the truth, but he believed someone had to remember. Lila looked down at her tea. And what do you want from me? I want to hear the truth. She looked up. Why? Because I think the world needs it, and you deserve it. Recognition, respect. She smiled faintly. Respect doesn't feed the hungry, but it heals the forgotten. There was a pause. The wind brushed against the window pane. Daniel reached into his bag again and pulled out another photo, this one recent. It showed a young woman, wearing modern army fatigues. Her hair was tied back. Her expression was fierce. My daughter, he said. Her name's Emily. She's training to join special operations. They keep denying her requests for frontline roles. Lila, eyes softened. And you think I can inspire her? I think your story might change more than just her. Lila stood and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled out a dusty box and opened it. Inside were torn documents, a silver pin, and a folded photo. She handed it to Daniel. Recognize anyone? He unfolded it. It was a picture of a small group, people in total, standing together in a forest clearing. One of them was clearly Lila, younger, holding her helmet. One was a man with a large scar. Another, just slightly blurred, looked exactly like a young Marcus Rowan. I never saw this. Daniel whispered. No one was supposed to. We weren't supposed to exist. He looked at her. What was your last mission? Lila hesitated. She hadn't told anyone, not even in her journals. It wasn't a rescue, she said. It was a prevention. Daniel listened. There was a list, she continued. A list of informants, traitors hidden in high places. My team was sent to find the list and destroy it before it reached enemy hands. Did you find it? Yes, in the hands of someone we didn't expect. Who? Lila took a deep breath. One of our own. Daniel's eyes widened. It was Callan, she whispered. My partner, my friend. Daniel was silent. He had been working for the other side, selling locations. He sold out 2 of our units for money. I only found out because I saw the list and my name was on it, along with others, including Marcus. Daniel's voice was shaky. What did you do? I confronted him, he begged. Said he was doing it to protect someone he loved, that he didn't mean to hurt anyone, but I couldn't let it go, so I turned him in. Daniel exhaled. What happened to him? They said he vanished, but I think he was silenced. There was a long pause. Lila sat back down. Her voice became low, almost like she was speaking to herself. After that, I stopped being a person. I became a shadow. No medals, no name, just silence. Daniel wiped his eyes. You deserve better than this. Lila chuckled. What I deserve doesn't matter. He looked at her. Then let me ask you something important. If you had the chance, would you tell the world your story? Lila stared out the window. I don't know, she said finally. The world didn't listen before, Daniel nodded, but they're listening now. He left an hour later. As he stepped out into the cold, Lila stood in her doorway and said one last thing. Tell your daughter. The hardest battles aren't on the field. They're after. Daniel nodded. I'll tell her. Then he was gone. That night, Lila didn't sleep. She dug through her closet and found a small lockbox. Inside were the last untouched items from her past. One was a folded document titled, Classified Operation Echo Silence. She remembered that mission. She remembered the silence that followed. She placed the document on her table, lit a candle, and began reading. She was going to remember everything. Not just for herself, but for everyone who forgot, or never knew, because maybe Daniel was right. Maybe it was time to speak. But first, she had to face the truth. All of it. Even the parts she buried. Even the ones that still hurt. That night, Lila sat by the dim candlelight, reading the file marked Operation Echo Silence. The edges were worn, and the ink had faded with time, but the words still hit her like bullets. Each name, each code, each lie. It was the mission that changed everything. The one that ended her team. The one that buried her name forever. She stared at the list of operatives who were betrayed. She remembered every face, every loss, and the one name that haunted her most. Callan. Her closest friend. Her partner, the man who once saved her life, and then nearly destroyed everything. It had started with a simple order. Go to Sector 9B, retrieve the briefcase. Destroy the files if necessary. That was all she was told. No names, no background, no reason. Lila had followed orders all her life. But that day, something felt wrong. She remembered how cold the air was when they landed near the forest of Sector 9B, how the snow crunched beneath their boots. Callan was quiet, too quiet. He usually joked, even during tense moments. But that time, he just looked ahead. She remembered asking him, what's bothering you? He shook his head. Just tired, but she could see it in his eyes. He was hiding something. They found the briefcase inside a collapsed safe house, burned walls, broken beams, no survivors. Lila picked it up and cracked the code within seconds. Inside were the files, a list of secret informants working inside their own military command. Some names she didn't know, others shocked her. There was Commander Rourke, General Hastings, and Marcus Rowan. She had frozen, her fingers trembling. That's when she heard the click of a gun behind her. She turned slowly. Callan stood there, weapon raised, his face pale, eyes broken. I didn't want you to see this, he whispered. Lila stared at him. It was you. You were the leak. He nodded, barely able to speak. Why? She whispered. My brother. He choked. They were going to kill him. He was caught with intel. I gave them names to protect him. Lila's voice turned cold. You sold out our people. He lowered the gun slightly. I didn't want to hurt anyone. But once I started, they demanded more. It was the only way. You lied to me, she said. He took a step forward. Please, Lila, just burn the case. Walk away. We can start over. Disappear together. She stared at him for a long time, and then she pulled her knife. Don't make me do this, she said. Tears filled Callan's eyes. You don't have to, but she did. They fought two shadows in the snow, kicking up ash in pain. He was faster. She was smarter. When it ended, she had his gun. He had a cut across his cheek, and the briefcase was in her arms. I won't kill you, she said, but I'll never trust you again. She left him there, in the ruins. As the extraction chopper arrived, when she handed the case to command, she told them the truth. About the files. About Callan. They said he'd be dealt with. She never saw him again. They shut down her unit after that. Said the exposure was too dangerous. Too many leaks. Too many memories. And just like that, Shadow Unit 17 was erased. No medals. No honors. Just silence. Lila stared at the candle flame now, decades later, and whispered, I'm sorry, Callan. I really did care. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. She opened it, expecting Daniel, but it was someone else. A young woman, maybe dark eyes, strong jawline, wearing a cadet's jacket. Her voice was clear. Are you Miss Lila Jennings? Lila nodded. I'm Emily Rowan, the girl said. My father sent me. Lila stepped aside and let her in. Emily moved like a soldier, but her face showed nerves. I wanted to meet you, she said. My father says you're a legend. I'm just old, Lila replied. Emily smiled. He also said you'd say something like that. They sat at the table. Emily pulled out her phone. I recorded my training. Do you want to see? Lila nodded. Dot on the screen. Emily was running an obstacle course, climbing walls, crawling through mud. She fell once, then got back up. Your posture's off when you carry weight, Lila said quietly. Emily blinked. You saw that? Lila leaned back. I saw everything. Emily paused the video. Why don't they let us fight? Why do they say women should only be support? Lila stared at her because they're afraid. Not of you failing, of you succeeding. Emily's eyes lit up. You're the proof, she said. You did what most men couldn't. I did what I had to, Lila replied. Emily pulled out a folded letter. My father said I should give this to you. Lila opened it. It was a military invitation, a private ceremony. It read, to Miss Lila Jennings. You are hereby invited to attend a classified recognition event for non-recorded wartime service. Your presence is requested by command and surviving members of classified units. Lila's hands trembled. This is real. Emily nodded. He fought for it, got them to open a special session, Lila whispered. After all these years. Emily leaned forward. The world forgot you, but some of us are trying to remember. That night, Lila couldn't sleep again. The next morning, she dressed in her coat. She took the patch and sewed it back firmly. She polished her boots. Her fingers shook, but her heart felt steady. Daniel arrived in a black government car. You ready? He asked. No, she said, but I'll go anyway. They drove 4 hours through small towns, across quiet roads. Finally, they reached a large government building. No signs. No guards visible, but cameras followed every move. Inside, the walls were white and cold. Lila was escorted to a waiting room. Other people were there, men and women. All older, some in wheelchairs, some with missing limbs, some stared at the floor, some at nothing, but all of them wore the same patch. The wolf head. Shadow Unit 17. A man in the corner looked up and smiled. Well, I'll be damned, he said. Lila Jennings. She stared at him. Griggs. She whispered. He nodded. Still ugly. Still alive. A few others looked her way. Jennings, a woman said, rising slowly. I thought you died. Not yet, Lila said. They gathered around her. Old ghosts, old friends. They didn't hug. They just stood close, like soldiers who remembered what silence meant. An officer walked in. The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes. Only unit members and authorized family allowed. They entered a dim hall. A small stage. No cameras. No news. Just truth. One by one names were read. Not full names, just calcines. Code words: Raven, Vulture, Ghost, Whisper, Iron, Fang, Wolf. Lila stood when hers was called. Wolf, the officer said. Mission record: 47 classified engagements. 0 mission failures. 23 lives saved. 1 betrayal prevented. Status: Silent Hero. Daniel stood silently in the back, Emily beside him, eyes shining. Lila didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded. The officer looked at them all. You were never supposed to exist. But the world owes you more than it knows. We can't give you medals. We can't write your names in history books. But we can say this. Thank you. As they left the stage, someone called out, Jennings, what happened to Callan? Leela paused, and then she answered, nothing good. Outside the hall, the wind was colder now. Daniel walked her back to the car. You didn't cry? He said. I did, she replied. But on the inside, he placed something in her hand, a folded photo. It was her and Callan sitting on a hilltop, smiling. Where did you get this? She asked. My father kept it, said that smile meant the world still had a chance. Lila didn't say anything. She just stared at the photo, and then looked at the sky. For the first time in years, the silence felt different. It felt lighter, but just as she stepped into the car, she saw something in the distance. A man watching, wearing an old army coat, with a scar across his cheek. Before she could say a word, he disappeared into the crowd. The years rolled by like autumn leaves carried away by the wind, quiet, unnoticed, and without meaning. For her they were just shadows of time. Each morning she woke up before sunrise, still brushing her boots like a ritual, though she hadn't worn combat shoes in decades. She lived alone in a modest apartment near the edge of town, where nobody cared who you were as long as you paid rent on time. The neighbors referred to her as the quiet old woman, and that's exactly how she liked Aitor, at least that's what she told herself. She had long since stopped correcting people when they assumed she was just another retired teacher or factory worker. Whenever someone asked her about her past, she would smile slightly and say, I did what I had to. That was her code. The oath of silence she had carried since the day she returned home, the kind of silence that burrowed deep into the bones. At night, she often sat by the window, sipping tea and staring into the distance. Her hands, once steady enough to disarm bombs and stitch wounds under gunfire, now trembled slightly as she lifted the cup. Still, her mind remained sharp. Every detail from those missions, every scream, every whisper of wind in enemy territory, they never left her. Her country had asked her to forget. But how do you forget the sounds of boys crying for their mothers in the middle of war? How do you forget the cold? One evening, while she was walking back from the pharmacy, she saw a group of teens bullying a boy half their size. They had cornered him near a garbage bin, one of them holding his phone high like a trophy. The boy had tears in his eyes, but he wasn't begging, he was just quiet. It reminded her of someone herself. Perhaps she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward with a force that seemed unnatural for a woman of her age. Put the phone down, she said, her voice calm but commanding. The boys laughed at first. Grandma, go knit a sweater or something, one said, but when she took a step closer, something changed. Her posture, her gaze, her presence. They backed away slowly, confused, muttering curses under their breath as they scattered. The boy looked up at her, surprised. Thank you, he whispered. She just nodded and walked away. What she didn't notice was that someone across the street had been filming the entire scene. By the next morning, a short clip titled Grandma Saves Boy Like a Total Badass was circulating quietly on local social media. The video quality wasn't great, but her stance, her command, her composure, it caught attention. Some laughed and called her Combat Granny. Others were intrigued, but by noon, the video was forgotten, replaced by new trends, new controversies. She didn't know about the video. She didn't care. She had seen too many real battles to be impressed by online clicks. That night, though, she felt something stir inside her. Not pride, not regret, but something close to restlessness. Later that week, while walking through the market, she overheard two women discussing how women today are so soft, they can't even cook rice without a recipe. One scoffed. She chuckled quietly but didn't comment. Another man once loudly declared near the post office that women had it easy back in the day. She almost turned around and told him about carrying a wounded comrade for 2 miles through a minefield. Almost, but instead, she kept walking. She had no need to prove anything anymore, or so she thought. Back home, she stared at her small wooden box, the one she never opened. Inside were pieces of her forgotten identity, an old photograph, a rusted pin, her faded unit patch, and a sealed letter she had never dared to read. One night, she finally opened it. The handwriting was messy, hurried, clearly written during battle. If you're reading this, it means you made it. I always knew you would. You were the strongest of us, the quietest, too. I hope one day they know what you did. Even if they don't, I will always. Her hands trembled more than usual. She folded the letter carefully and held it to her chest, closing her eyes. I'm tired, Jay, she whispered. The next morning, something strange happened. A knock at the door. She rarely had visitors. When she opened it, a young woman stood. Their early 20s, curious eyes, nervous smile. Are you Ms. Kaur? She nodded. I'm doing a research project for university on undocumented military units from the Cold War era. Your name came up twice. Ms. Kaur's eyes narrowed. You must be mistaken. I don't think so, the girl said gently. There was a name written on a field map found in an abandoned base. Corps perimeter sweep complete. Proceeding with evac. It was dated 1973. Ms. Kaur went silent. The girl fumbled with her bag. I'm sorry, shouldn't have come uninvited. But when I saw the jacket in that video, What video? The girl's eyes widened. Oh, the viral clip? From the alley? You stopped those boys? Ms. Kaur didn't answer. I wanted to know if you were really her. The woman from Shadow Unit 17. There it was. A name she hadn't heard in decades. Who told you that name? Ms. Kaur asked quietly. No one. I found fragments, declassified files, erased names, mentions of a unit that didn't exist. All male names? Except one that was always blacked out. Ms. Kaur looked out the window. Why do you care? The girl's voice softened. Because I think people deserve to know the truth. And because I want to be like you. Ms. Kaur smiled for the first time in days. Not wide. Just enough to crack the silence. I was never meant to be remembered, she said. We weren't supposed to leave a trace. But you did. The girl replied. You left strength. That night Miss Kaur sat by the window again, holding the girl's university card. Her name was Amira. Her father had served, too. She looked at her own hands now shaking more often than not and whispered, maybe silence is not what the world needs anymore. She stood slowly and walked toward the wardrobe. At the back, wrapped in cloth, was her original uniform. She hadn't touched it in years. She pulled it out, unfolding the creases like unfolding a memory. As she ran her fingers over the unit patch, she noticed the edges had started to fray, but the symbol was still there, a dagger crossing through a flame. Shadow Unit 17. She placed it on the table. Then she reached for a needle and thread. Her hands were shaky, but she began to stitch, not because it needed repair, but because it was time to be seen, time to be remembered, time to speak. And just as she placed the final stitch, a sharp knock echoed through her apartment again. She opened the door and froze. This time, it wasn't a curious girl, it was a man in uniform, a general, and he was staring at the patch on her table, with eyes wide and full of recognition. Ma'am, he said, stepping back and saluting her. Is it really you? Her eyes narrowed. Who are you? He looked down, reached into his coat, and slowly pulled out something she never thought she'd see again. A unit coin, engraved with the mark of Shadow Unit 17. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, You saved my father. The coin in his hand caught the light. It shimmered softly, like a forgotten memory brought back to life. Miss Kaur stared at it, frozen in the doorway. For a moment, the years fell away, the wrinkles on her hands, the ache in her knees. The silence of her lonely apartment hall disappeared. That coin. She hadn't seen one in over 40 years. The general didn't lower his hand. He stood tall, his eyes steady, but something in them betrayed emotion. Not authority, not pride, but gratitude. And something deeper, perhaps even guilt. I didn't expect you to remember, he said gently. You met him only once, but he never forgot you. Miss Kaur stepped back and motioned for him to enter. The apartment was small, neatly arranged, sparsely decorated. A faded photo of a mountain range hung on one wall. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. She walked to the table and sat down slowly, still watching him. Who was your father? He sat across from her, placing the coin gently between them like an offering. Captain I.S. Malik, 1973, border conflict, Eastern Front. He was injured, chest wound, lost too much blood. You carried him through enemy fire. Miss Kaur looked away. Her jaw tightened slightly. She remembered. Not his name, not his face, but the sound of boots on gravel, the smell of smoke, the way someone had gripped her sleeve and whispered, Go, I'll cover you. I didn't save him alone, she said, but he lived because of you, the general replied. He came home, he raised a family. He told us stories about a soldier who didn't speak much, who fought like a ghost and disappeared before the medics arrived. He said if it weren't for you, we wouldn't exist. Ms. Kaur picked up the coin slowly. The metal was cold, but familiar. Her thumb traced the symbol dagger through flame. The mark of the forgotten, the ones who never got medals, never got names on walls. I thought everyone from the unit was gone, she whispered. They are, he said. You're the last name on the list. She looked up sharply. You've seen the list? He nodded. Declassified 2 weeks ago. Only partial files. Most names erased, except yours redacted but not removed. That's why I came. I had to see if the stories were true. If you were real? She gave a tired smile. I'm real. Just old and rusted. No, ma'am, he said. You're a legend. She laughed, quiet, broken, but sincere. Legends don't buy painkillers in bulk. They sat in silence for a while. The kettle whistled. She got up and poured 2 cups of tea. The steam rose between them like fog from the past. I don't know what you expect from me, she said after a long pause. I'm not going back. That life is over. I'm not asking you to, he said. But there's a ceremony next week, honoring unsung heroes. We want to give you the medal. Publicly, properly. She stiffened. No, but no, she said again, firmer. We were meant to be forgotten. That was the deal. No names, no medals, no questions. That was the price we paid to do what others couldn't. He looked down. I understand, but I think the world needs to know, especially now. She turned away, staring at the window. Outside, children played in the street. A boy chased a paper airplane. Do you know what it's like to hold a dying friend and promise them you'll never tell anyone what they did? She said quietly. I made that promise many times. I won't break it now, not even for a medal. He nodded slowly. Okay then, let me ask for something else. She raised an eyebrow. There's a group of young cadets, women, brave, committed, but unsure of their strength. They don't know what it means to fight quietly, to survive with honor and silence. I want them to meet you, even once, not as a hero, just as you. She thought about it. The girl who had visited days ago, Amir, the one with the eyes full of questions. You want me to talk? She asked. No, ma'am, he said gently. I want you to exist in front of them. That'll be enough. She looked at the coin again, her fingers wrapped around it tightly. Maybe it was time, not for glory, not for fame, but to pass the torch quietly with dignity. Fine, she said. One visit. No cameras, no media, just them and me. He stood and saluted again. Yes, ma'am. Before he left, he paused at the door. You know, my father cried when he told us about you. He said you were the bravest person he ever saw. Ms. Kaur smiled sadly. Then he didn't look in the mirror enough. 2 days later, she stood outside the academy gates. She wore her old uniform cleaned and pressed. It didn't fit like it used to, but it still held weight. Inside the hall, a group of 10 young cadets waited. Their eyes widened as she walked in. Some stood up instantly. Others stared, unsure. She said nothing at first, just walked slowly to the front of the room. She placed the unit coin on the table. This, she said, voice quiet but steady, is the only proof I ever existed. No one moved. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm not here to teach. I'm here because someone asked me to remind you of one thing. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it listens, sometimes it bleeds quietly, but it always stands back up. She looked around the room. The youngest girl had tears in her eyes. I was a soldier in a unit that didn't exist. I have no medals, no name in the books, but I have my life, and I used it to save others. That is enough. One cadet raised her hand. What was the hardest part? Ms. Kaur thought for a long time. Coming home, she finally said, and pretending none of it ever happened. They were quiet after that, listening, absorbing. She told them one story, only one, not about blood or gunfire, but about a moment. In the cold forest, when a fellow soldier placed a flower on the ground for a fallen comrade. No words, she said, just that flower. That was our funeral. That was our prayer. When she finished, the room was still. Then, one by one, the cadets stood and saluted her. She didn't salute back. She just nodded and left. Outside, the general was waiting. I think you lit a fire in there, he said. She smiled faintly. Not my job to light it, just to show it still burns. As she walked away, she felt lighter, not younger, but somehow freer. And back in the academy hall, one of the cadets picked up the coin she'd left behind. She held it to her chest. She was a ghost, she whispered. But now, she's our beginning. The next morning, Ms. Kaur stood by her window, a cup of tea in her hand, watching the sun slowly rise. The visit to the academy had awakened something inside her, a memory, a warmth, a pain she had locked away long ago. The silence in her apartment no longer felt heavy, it felt earned. But just as she turned away, a loud knock echoed through the hallway. 3 firm knocks. Not the kind of knock you hear from a neighbor or a delivery man. This was military. She paused. Her fingers tensed. Slightly around the cup, she opened the door. A man in a gray suit stood there, mid-50s, tall, serious eyes. Not the general, not military, but official. Miss Kaur, he asked. She nodded. My name is Faison Remen. I'm with the Defense Ministry. May I come in? She hesitated. Something in his tone felt too calm, too rehearsed. But she stepped aside. He entered quietly, glanced around, and sat without invitation. He placed a folder on the table. You've been in contact with General Zaman? He said. It wasn't a question. Ms. Kaur sat opposite him. Yes? He opened the folder. Inside were photos, blurry satellite images, surveillance screenshots. Even one of her walking into the academy 2 days ago. You're watching me? She asked, her voice calm but cold. We're watching everyone from your unit, he replied. You're the last, the final piece. Miss Kaur didn't blink. The final piece of what? He leaned forward. There are people, foreign agents, have been looking for something, or someone. They believe a former operative from your unit possesses knowledge of an operation that was buried decades ago. An operation that could ignite serious political consequences. Ms. Kaur raised her eyebrows. You think it's me? We know it's you, he said flatly. You were at the heart of it. The mission in the Northern Corridor, 1974. Her face hardened. That operation, she had promised never to speak of it again. It wasn't just buried, it was erased. No names, no witnesses, no second chances. You're 10 years too late, she said quietly. I gave everything I had back then. I don't remember what color my own blood was by the end of that winter. Faison placed a paper on the table. It had the stamp of national security. The heading read, Request for Emergency Testimony, Classified Reopening. We're reopening the file, he said, and we need your testimony. Behind closed doors, no public record. She stood up. You don't get to ask that of me, not after 40 years of silence. He didn't flinch. It's not a request, Miss Kaur. It's a matter of national stability. The people who were involved, Some of them are still in power. Some are enemies now. You know who did what? That truth can prevent a disaster. She turned away, facing the window again. And if I refuse? He sighed. Then someone else will find you, and they won't come with folders. She stayed quiet. I'll give you 2 days, he said, standing. Think about what's at risk. He left and the door clicked shut behind him. Ms. Kaur sat back down slowly. Her hand trembled slightly. She hadn't heard the name of that mission in over 4 decades. Operation Wintervale. A mission so buried it didn't exist on paper, only in scars. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, remembering the snow, the bodies, the map that had changed hands, and the one person who died to protect it. By morning, she had made her decision. At exactly 10 a.m., she walked into the defense ministry. No one recognized her. An old woman with quiet steps. A staffer led her to a dark room with 2 chairs and a single light. Faison was already waiting. She sat. I'm not here to talk about the politics, she said, or the lies, or the people who signed the orders and then ran. I'll tell you only what matters. He nodded and turned on the recorder. She began. Wintervale wasn't a mission. It was a cover. We were told to intercept enemy plans near the northern border, but what we found wasn't plans. It was a child, a boy, 11 years old, curled up in the ruins of an outpost, shivering, silent. Faison looked confused. A child. Miss Kaur nodded. He had something in his pocket, a folded paper, hand-drawn a map. We didn't understand its importance until later. It showed tunnels, underground passages connecting multiple regions across the conflict zone, smuggling routes, weapons, lines. It wasn't drawn by him. It was copied, memorized, and perfectly reproduced. Faison leaned forward. Where's the original? Destroyed, she said, by my own hands. I burned it when I realized what it was. His eyes narrowed. Why? Because he died for it, she replied. Sniper fire. We were ambushed trying to bring him back. The boy didn't make it, and that map, it wasn't worth another child's blood. She paused, her voice lowered. We were supposed to bury everything, even our grief. But I never forgot his name, Ishan. That was all he said before he died. Faison sat back slowly, the weight of her words settling. There's no copy, he asked. No, she said. And even if there was, you'd never get it from me. Silence filled the room. Finally Faison spoke. Thank you for your honesty. She stood. You're welcome. But let me give you one more truth. He looked up. Sometimes protecting your country means protecting its secrets even from its own leaders. Tell your generals that. She walked out without waiting for permission. 2 days later, General Zaman visited her again, this time in civilian clothes. He brought her roses and a soft scarf. They told me you refused to share the location, he said. She smiled gently. I didn't refuse. I chose, and I chose peace. He didn't argue. He placed the scarf on her shoulders. You've done more than enough. But there's someone who wants to meet you. A knock on her door. A young woman stepped in, slender, nervous, and wearing a necklace with a coin. The coin. Amira, the general said. Top of her class. Inspired by a woman who once told her that strength doesn't always shout. Miss Kaur smiled warmly. Amira stepped forward. Ma'am, I want to learn from you. Miss Kaur took her hand. Then listen carefully, she whispered. The world will give you orders. The battlefield will give you noise. But only your soul will give you truth. Amira's eyes filled with tears. That evening, they sat together in the apartment. The young and the old. One just starting her path, the other finally at peace with hers. And on the table, between them, the coin glowed. Softly under the lamp, not as a symbol of war, but of the quiet warriors who chose silence, and still changed the world. The training yard at the academy buzzed with morning energy. Young cadets shouted drills, boots struck the ground in rhythm, and flags swayed above their heads. But inside the old guest classroom at the far end of the compound, silence ruled. Mid Kaur stood in front of a small group, only 5 students, handpicked by General Zaman himself. Among them was Amira, her eyes wide, eager, and loyal. Before we start, Ms. Kaur said, I need to make one thing clear. I am not here to teach you how to fight. You already have instructors for that. I am here to teach you how to survive. Your conscience. The room went quiet. No one had expected those words. She picked up a piece of chalk and wrote one sentence on the board. Victory without peace is defeat. Then she turned around. The battlefield is not just land. It is your mind, your past, your pain, and your choices. Amira raised her hand softly. Ma'am, how did you know when to walk away from war? Ms. Kaur looked at her for a long moment. Then she spoke, not like a teacher, but like a witness. When the war followed me home. That evening, Amira stayed behind after class. She walked Ms. Kaur back to her room, holding her arm gently. You're still strong, Amira said. Stronger than all of us. Ms. Kaur laughed softly. I'm just old enough to stop pretending I'm not tired. As they reached the apartment door, Amira hesitated. Ma'am, do you ever miss it? The missions, the rush, the uniform. Ms. Kaur unlocked the door and pushed it open. No, I miss the people, the ones who didn't return. Inside, her eyes fell on the photo frame sitting near the lamp. The same old picture her unit, 20 of them, arms around each other, some with dirt on their faces, all smiling. 19 were gone. She was the last. Amira looked at the photo and pointed. Who is that? The tall one with the crooked cap. Miss. Cora smiled faintly. Captain Bilal, the one who never stopped joking. He saved my life twice, and still blamed me for ruining his boots. They both chuckled, but the moment was interrupted by a knocked-out Ms. Cora opened the door. It was Faison Remen again, only this time, his face looked pale. He stepped in without speaking and handed her a newspaper. The headline read, Retired Brigadier found dead in Islamabad, suspected heart attack, but it was the photo under the headline that made Ms. Cora stiffen. That's Colonel Azim, she whispered. He was part of Operation Wintervale. One of the signatories. Faison nodded grimly. He died this morning. No signs of forced entry, no signs of foul play. But he had just called the ministry last night, said he had something urgent to confess about the mission. He never got the chance. Ms. Cora lowered the paper. You think someone's cleaning up the past. We think someone's trying to keep the mission buried forever. Amira looked between them, confused. But why? Isn't it over? Ms. Cora looked at her. No, it never really ended. 2 hours later, Ms. Cora and Faison sat in his car outside a government archive building. It was quiet, nearly deserted, and protected by 3 layers of ID clearance. This is where all closed files go, Faison said, and where they disappear. They entered silently. A young officer met them, showed them down a corridor, and unlocked a metal door. Inside were dozens of boxers. Files from decades ago, paper faded with time, dust thick enough to hide secrets. Faison found one box labeled, Operation Wintervale, clearance level 9Ms. Cora opened it carefully. Most of it was blacked out text. Redactions over every line. One photo remained untouched, a picture of the boy Ishan, the child who had carried the map. Suddenly, Miss Cora froze. There was a second photo, not of the child, but of a man standing beside him, face hidden by a scarf, only the eyes were visible. She leaned closer, her breath caught in her throat. Those eyes. They belonged to someone she had once trusted. Captain Bilal. Her hand trembled. Faison noticed. What is it? She said nothing for a long time, then quietly. Captain Bilal wasn't killed in the mission. Faison looked confused. What do you mean? The records said he was buried along the eastern hill. Ms. Cora shook her head. No, his body was never recovered. Just his dog tags. I always wondered. Faison leaned in. You think he turned? No, she whispered. I think he was forced to disappear. And now someone's trying to erase every part of that mission, including him. They left the archive in silence, both their minds racing. Back in her apartment that night, Ms. Cora couldn't sleep again. She stared at the ceiling, her heart pounding. She reached into her old trunk, the one at the foot of her bed. From inside, she pulled out a bundle of letters, all addressed to her from various army posts across the country, years ago. But one letter stood out. No name, no return address. Just 3 words. He's still alive. She had received it 7 years after the mission ended. Back then, she dismissed it as a cruel prank. But now, she opened it again. Inside a single line, the boy was the key, but the man had the lock. She stared at it, the words spinning in her mind. Who sent this? What did it mean? And then, suddenly, something clicked. The tunnels, the map, the boy copied it. But Captain Bilal had drawn it. He wasn't protecting the child. He was using him to pass the map without detection. If Bilal had survived, then he had vanished with full knowledge of those tunnels. Knowledge worth killing for. She grabbed the photo again, looked into those eyes. It was him. And if someone was killing people now to hide the truth, Benny was either next or already dead, unless he was the one doing the killing. The next morning, she visited General Zaman. She explained everything: Bilal's possible betrayal, the old letter, the photo. The general listened without interruption. Then he opened a drawer and handed her a report. 3 weeks ago, he said, an unidentified man broke into a private defense contractor's facility in Baluchistan, took nothing, left nothing, but the cameras caught a flash of his face. It was old, blurry, and angled from below. But look, he slid the photo forward. Ms. Cora looked down. Her heart stopped. It was him, older, with a beard, a burn scar across his neck. But still him. Where was this? She asked. Chagai district, near the tunnels, so he was alive, and nearby. But why now? She whispered. Why reappear, after all these years? The general leaned forward. I think he knows someone is coming after him. I think he wants to warn you. Her eyes darkened. Then let him. She stood. I'm going back there, she said. General Zaman tried to protest, but she raised a hand. I started this with him. I'll finish it the same way. That night, Ms. Cora packed a small bag. Amira appeared at the door. You're leaving? She asked. Ms. Cora nodded. Double quotes. Where? To find someone I thought was a ghost. Can I come? Ms. Cora looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled softly. No, but one day you will go on a journey like this too. And when that day comes, you'll know what to carry and what to leave behind. She handed her the old coin. Keep this. It reminds me of who I was. Now it can remind you of who you're becoming. Amira held it to her chest, tears welling. Ms. Cor left quietly, without looking back. The train rolled through the desert. She sat by the window, watching the dust rise, the sun dipping low. Over the horizon, as the train approached Chigaya, a strange stillness filled her. Somewhere out there, a man who had once saved her life, and then vanished, was waiting. Whether he was friend or enemy now, she would soon find out. And this time, there would be no uniforms, no medals, just the truth between two ghosts. Margaret had not asked for recognition. She had long buried the desire to be seen or applauded. But after meeting Lieutenant Colonel Mason, who recognized the unit insignia on her worn jacket, and after their emotional conversation at the park bench, something shifted inside her. For the first time in decades, someone had looked at her and seen more than just an old woman. Mason hadn't seen wrinkles or silence or age. He had seen history. He had seen her strength. And now he was asking the impossible, to bring her back into the light she'd spent a lifetime hiding from. "You should be honored, ma'am," he had told her, "not just for your service, but for your silence, for carrying a burden the rest of us could never imagine." She had hesitated, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she had replied, "If they wouldn't honor me then, why would they honor me now?" But Mason was not like the others. The next day he returned to her small apartment with a folder in his hand, and determination in his eyes. "I have submitted your name for military honors," he said. "You deserve at least that much." Margaret didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. She had spent her life carefully hiding in plain sight, never telling anyone about Operation Crimson Dust or the dozens of lives she had pulled out of hell with her bare hands. She was trained to erase her tracks, and yet now, decades later, her story was resurfacing. Still, a part of her heart stirred. Something long dead began to breathe again. Mason had used what contacts he had in the Pentagon. The few official files left on Shadow Unit 17 were deeply redacted, but one document listed a code A91, female operative, specialized rescue, unknown identity. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him to push forward a Medal of Valor nomination. 2 weeks passed, then 4, then 6, and then came a call from Washington. Margaret was invited to a private military dinner at the East District Command Center. High-ranking officers would be present. Mason offered to accompany her. "I don't want to go," she said. "Then go, for us," Mason replied. "For all those you saved who never had the voice to thank you," she agreed, quietly, reluctantly. On the evening of the event, Mason picked her up in a sleek black car. Margaret wore her old military jacket cleaned and pressed and pinned her faded badge above her heart. She hadn't worn makeup in years, but she combed her silver hair back and stood tall. Inside the grand hall, chandeliers sparkled like stars above the polished floors. The room was filled with brass and metals, polished shoes, and proud chests. Young officers in clean uniforms moved with confidence, unaware of the living legend who walked quietly among them. At first, no one noticed her. She walked slowly, clutching a small bag. Some looked at her with polite curiosity, others with subtle annoyance. A few even assumed she was someone's guest or worse, a helper, an older woman, worn down by time, standing in a hall of fresh ambition. It was exactly like the grocery store again. She was ignored again. She was invisible. Mason introduced her to several generals, but their smiles were brief, distracted. One general even glanced at her patch and frowned, mumbling, "That insignia doesn't look standard." Margaret said nothing. She simply nodded. A young colonel offered her a seat near the back. "I was told I'd be seated up front," she said quietly. The colonel laughed. "That's usually reserved for decorated officers or honorees, ma'am. Don't worry, you'll see the stage fine from here." Mason's jaw clenched. She was invited by name. "Look at your list again." But the colonel had already turned away. Margaret sat down slowly, her breath caught between her ribs. She felt a wave of something old and heavy pressing into her chest. Shame? Anger? No, it was disappointment. She had hoped, just for once, to be treated as she deserved, not for pride but for truth. The ceremony began. Names were called, honors were read, medals were pinned, speeches were made about courage and sacrifice, but no one mentioned her, not once. An hour passed, and then, just as Margaret shifted in her chair, ready to leave quietly, the door at the back of the hall opened. Every officer stood as a tall, broad-shouldered man entered in full uniform. 4 stars gleamed on his collar. The room fell silent. Hanadel Marcus Drennan. He was known for his strict discipline, unmatched battlefield record, and zero tolerance for mediocrity. Even the room full of decorated soldiers grew nervous at his presence. Margaret didn't stand. She simply looked up. And then it happened. General Drennan walked through the hall, nodding respectfully at some officers, but then stopped. His eyes landed on her. And they widened. He stared at the patch on her chest. He looked into her face, and for a moment, his lips parted, but no words came. Margaret raised an eyebrow. The general took one step forward, then another, then another, then another, until he stood directly in front of her. Everyone in the room turned to see what he was doing. Without a word, General Drennan stood at full attention, and then, with slow, reverent movement, he saluted her. The room froze. No one moved. No one blinked. Even the colonel who had seated her in the back looked stunned. Margaret stood slowly. General Drennan, she said softly. He swallowed. Operative, A91. I can't believe it's you. A murmur rose through the hall. You know her, sir? Someone asked. General Drennan turned to the crowd. She was part of Shadow Unit 17. During Operation Crimson Dust, she saved over 40 lives behind enemy lines, including my father's. He used to tell me stories about her. Said she was more myth than soldier. I've searched for her for years. Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. Then a wave of applause echoed through the grand hall as officers young and old turned their eyes to Margaret. Now standing, tall, wearing the jacket no one had believed in, tears shimmered in Mason's eyes. And for the first time in decades, Margaret allowed herself to smile, not out of pride, but peace. She was no longer invisible, no longer erased. She had finally been seen. That night after the ceremony, Margaret didn't sleep. Not because she was restless, but because something inside her had finally awakened. For so long, she had carried the weight of forgotten battles and quiet rescues. For so long, she had let the silence protect her, keep her away from questions, from pain, from memories too heavy to carry in public. But that one moment in the grand hall when General Drennan saluted her, in front of everyone, shook something loose in her chest. For the first time, she felt seen. But with that recognition came something more dangerous: attention. The very next morning, there were already whispers in the military news outlets. Unidentified female operative honored by General Marcus Drennan is Operation Crimson Dust Nitrogen Monoxide, longer classified. Who is the woman in the old jacket? Mason showed up at her apartment with a thick envelope and a worried look. They're digging, he said, placing the envelope on her kitchen table. Washington wants to know more. And not just the media. I've had 2 calls from the Department of Defense and 1 from the National Archives. Margaret opened the envelope. Inside were copies of emails, memos, press requests, and a stamped invitation. A press conference. They were planning a formal address led by General Drennan to publicly acknowledge her role in Shadow Unit 17. They're calling it historical, Mason said, watching her closely. You'd be the first unacknowledged female special ops operative to be officially recognized from a mission that was buried by 5 different administrations. Margaret didn't speak for a long time. She stared at the documents. Then she whispered, I was never supposed to exist. Mason leaned forward. But you did, and they're finally ready to admit it. She looked up slowly. Ready to admit it, or ready to control it? That night, as Margaret sat in her chair by the window, she went through an old wooden box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters, some coded, some torn, along with photos, small maps, and 2 medals she had never claimed. She held one of the photographs close. It showed her and her old team, deep in enemy territory, crouched near a ruined bunker. Half of them didn't make it home. But those who did, those like Margaret, had sworn to keep their missions quiet. Now the silence was ending, and she wasn't sure if that was a good thing. The day of the press conference arrived. It was being held at Fort Arlington Military Base, where senior officers, journalists, and historians gathered. Cameras were positioned. The American flag hung behind the podium. Margaret arrived in a car driven by Mason. She wore the same military jacket, but this time, she stood taller, her steps more sure. As they entered the hall, flashbulbs flickered. She's here. Is that the Crimson Dust operative, ma'am? What's your real name? She didn't answer. She simply walked forward, toward a podium where General Drennan waited. Thank you for being here, he said into the microphone. Today, we correct history, not rewrite it, correct it. He then turned and gestured to her. This is Margaret Hale, operative in 91. She served during one of the most dangerous classified missions in modern warfare. She saved lives, carried wounded soldiers for miles through enemy zones, and she never once asked for recognition. Until now, we never gave it. The audience sat in stunned silence. Margaret approached the mic. She paused. Then she spoke, her voice strong, but calm. I didn't come here for fame. I didn't come here for applause. I came here to tell the truth. She held up a tattered patch. This insignia this Marquist once called fake. I was laughed at in line, pushed aside in stores, treated like I didn't belong. A few reporters nodded. Some lowered their cameras, listening closely. I fought not for medals, but for the people beside me. I buried my team in silence, and I came home in silence, because we were told we were shadows, ghosts, unseen. She paused. And yet here I stand. One reporter called out, Why now, ma'am? Margaret looked directly at him. Because one man saw me, one young officer who knew history, who respected the past, and because I'm tired of women like me disappearing. The room burst into applause, but in the back of the room, 2 men in dark suits did not clap. They whispered to each other. One of them checked a file. Their badges said, Department of Intelligence, Internal Division. After the conference, Mason escorted Margaret out toward the waiting car. That was incredible, he said. You've just changed history. Margaret didn't smile. They'll want to silence it again. Mason frowned. What do you mean? She nodded toward the 2 men in suits now following behind slowly. They're not here for a thank you, she whispered. They're here to decide what part of the truth they can allow. The moment Margaret heard the word case file, A chill ran down her spine. That had been decades since anyone dared mention it. She had signed the secrecy agreement with her blood literally, during a mission where ink would have revealed her position. That agreement wasn't just about silence. It was about survival. About protecting something much larger than her name or reputation. So when the suited agent said, "We'd like to talk privately," Margaret knew this wasn't just about history anymore. It was about power. And who still wanted to control it? Mason stepped forward. "She has nothing more to say." But the agent.com, with sharp gray eyes, held out a badge. "National Intelligence, Internal Affairs. This isn't optional." They didn't arrest her. They didn't even raise their voices. They just asked her to ride with them alone. "A few routine questions," they said. Margaret looked at Mason and gave a faint nod. "It's okay. I'll handle it." The door shut behind her, and for the first time since her return to public life, she felt like she was back in an interrogation cell like in the old missions, when the enemy asked questions not to hear the truth, but to catch you slipping. The room they took her to was cold, clinical. A long metal table, one chair on her side, two on theirs. No windows. One blinking camera in the corner. Agent Rhodes, the one who spoke earlier, sat across from her. His partner Agent Cleary remained silent, flipping through a brown folder marked restricted. Rhodes began. "You were part of Operation Crimson Dust." Margaret stayed silent. "You operated under the name A91. And yet, until this week, there's no public record of you. No medal, no ID logs. Not even an exit file." "Still?" She said nothing. Rhodes leaned forward. "You see why this makes people nervous, right?" Margaret finally spoke. "They erased me. I didn't ask for that. Your government did." Cleary placed a photo on the table. It was old, grainy. It showed a burning facility and several figures, running through smoke. "This is from the 1987 Kazim base bombing," he said. "The one officially listed as a training accident." Rhodes added, "But we now know it wasn't, and someone in your team left behind a signature." He slid another photo, this time of a wall sprayed with a red mark, an eagle claw holding a flame. Margaret narrowed her eyes. That was never supposed to be photographed. "And yet," Rhodes said coldly, "someone did, and the mark showed up in at least 3 other classified incidents, ones that didn't end cleanly." Margaret's voice grew firm. That symbol wasn't a message. It was a warning to civilians that the area was about to collapse. "We saved lives." Cleary spoke for the first time. "Or you covered something up." Margaret stood suddenly, her fists clenched on the table. "You brought me here to ask about marks on a wall. Where were you when my friends were bleeding in the snow?" Silence filled the room. Van Rhodes said softly, "This isn't about blame, it's about closure, for everyone. But to do that, we need the full story." Back at Mason's apartment, he paced the floor. General Drennan had already called twice. Reporters were waiting outside Margaret's place, and still no word. Then, at midnight, his phone buzzed. One message. Margaret released. "Coming home?" He ran downstairs. When she stepped out of the black car, she looked exhausted but calm. Mason helped her inside. "What did they want?" She looked at him with a tired smile. "They want me to write it all down. Everything." "What? Do you mean they want a document? A confession? A history? Whatever you want to call it. And will you?" Margaret didn't answer right away. She sat down at the table, poured herself a cup of tea, and stared at her hands. Maybe it's time someone told the truth. Over the next few days, Margaret began writing, not for them, but for herself. Each night she filled page after page, describing missions, names, dates, the people who didn't make it back, the civilians they saved, the orders they followed, and the ones they disobeyed for the sake of mercy. Mason helped organize the pages. He scanned photos, labeled maps. Together, they built a story, one that had been buried by fear. But as they neared completion, something changed. One morning, Mason came in holding a letter. It was unsigned, no return address. Inside was a single page with only one sentence. "The truth has a price. Stop now, or she pays it." Attached to the note was a photo, blurry, taken from a distance. It showed Margaret standing at a bus stop. The day before, Mason locked the door, drew the blinds, called General Drennan immediately. "We've been followed," he said. "Somebody's watching her." General Drennan didn't act surprised. "I was afraid of this," he said on speakerphone. "The deeper you go, the more enemies you wake up." "Who are they?" Mason asked. "Not everyone wants the truth revealed. Some of those missions crossed lines. If Margaret's story comes out, people in very high places will be exposed." Mason looked at Margaret. "Do we stop?" She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "We finish it." The next day, Margaret stood at her window, watching the street below. Everything felt heavier now. She had come from being ignored in a grocery store line to being hunted for telling the truth. Her journey had gone beyond recognition. It had become about justice, and the danger ahead didn't scare her. It fueled her, because now she knew someone still feared her voice. That meant it mattered. The night was still, but inside Margaret's chest, a storm raged. They found Jacob. Those 3 words echoed louder than any gunshot she'd ever heard. Jacob Grayson, the ghost. The sniper who vanished after the final Crimson Dust operation. The man everyone believed was either dead or buried so deep by the agency that even shadows couldn't find him. And now, someone had. Mason sat beside her, eyes wide. Did they say where? No, Margaret whispered. But if they reached out to me, it means Jacob's either running or asking for help. She stood slowly, reached for the closet, and opened an old black box. Inside it were her final belongings from the unit. A field journal, her rusted ID tag, and a sealed envelope labeled, "For Jacob, if I fall." General Drennan called 10 minutes later. He was tense. "I just got intel from Berlin. A man matching Jacob's description surfaced there, checked into a private clinic under a false name. Wounded, but alive. He's asking for you, Margaret." She breathed in sharply. "I'm going." "You shouldn't," the general warned. "This could be a trap." Margaret's voice was steady. "If it is, then let it close on me. I won't hide anymore." 2 days later, Berlin, Germany. The rain hadn't stopped since she landed. Margaret walked quietly through the cobblestone streets, Mason trailing behind her. They kept their heads low, eyes scanning every corner. The clinic was tucked between 2 buildings, the windows frosted. A receptionist greeted them in German, but Margaret handed her a coded note. Moments later, she was led upstairs, alone. Room 212. She hesitated at the door, and then opened it. The man lying in the bed was thinner, older, his once broad frame now fragile, worn by years of hiding, but his eyes sharp, gray, unblinking, hadn't changed. Jacob Grayson looked at her, smiled weakly, and whispered, "Didn't think you'd come." Margaret crossed the room, sat beside him, and for a moment, no words, just silence between 2 people who had once stared death in the face together. Then, softly, he said, "They tried to kill me. Twice. When I wouldn't sign the silence order. They buried us for doing the right thing. Maggie." "I know," she whispered. Jacob reached under his pillow and pulled out a worn flash drive. "This is everything. Missions, names, orders, even the ones they erased. It's all here." Margaret stared at it. This wasn't just a drive, it was the truth. Back in the U.S., 1 week later, Margaret and Mason returned under military escort. General Drennan met them at a private base hangar, face pale. "Jacob's safe?" he asked. "For now," Mason said. "But we think they know we have the files." Margaret handed the general the flash drive. "This needs to go public." Drennan looked torn. "If we release this, the consequences could be massive. Arrests, trials, some of our top leaders were involved." Margaret nodded. "Let the truth burn what it must." The press conference. Margaret stood at the podium. For weeks, her story had gone viral. Veterans came forward. Former agents sent letters. Families of fallen soldiers reached out with tears and gratitude. But today wasn't about her. It was about the men and women who had been silenced. She opened her speech with trembling hands. "I was ignored once in a grocery store, and for a moment, I felt invisible. But I've been invisible far longer than that. Not by strangers, but by the system I once served." She paused. "Today, we bring back the names that were erased. The stories hidden. The truths buried. Not to seek revenge, but to bring healing." Then she opened the folder and began reading the names. One by one, fallout. The media exploded. Headlines around the world. Secret U.S. ops exposed. Former agents' files rock. Washington. Margaret Kane, the woman who brought down a wall of silence. Jacob Grayson, confirmed alive. Testimony promised in court. Some officials resigned. Others were arrested. A few denied everything. But the public knew. The truth had surfaced. The medal. 1 month later. The president himself invited Margaret to the White House. She stood on a red-carpeted stage. Uniform pressed, medals polished. A row of journalists watched quietly as a new medal was unveiled. The Silent Valor Cross, awarded to those who served in operations. Denied by history, Margaret received the first. She didn't smile. She only whispered, "For the ones who didn't come home."